Have you ever wondered what the real price of an impeccable reputation was in an era when one wrong word could destroy the future of an entire family? Behind the heavy velvet curtains and sparkling chandeliers of the grand mansions of the Gilded Age lay not only wealth and power, but also quiet tragedies that were kept silent. These are the stories of women whose youth and hopes were sacrificed for the sake of preserving family dignity. Women who were forced to trade silk for modest dresses and become shadows in the homes of their more fortunate relatives. Watch this video to the end, and you will learn how noble origins became a curse and why, for many ladies, working in a wealthy household was worse than complete poverty. What if I told you that everything you believed in when looking at the beautiful portraits of that era hides a deep drama of loss of self? In a society where status determined the very right to exist, the financial collapse of the head of the family was a disaster comparable to death. For daughters of ruined noble or merchant families, there was only one decent way out that allowed them to avoid falling to the bottom of society and ending up in a workhouse. They were sent to serve wealthy relatives or acquaintances, disguising it as a visit or help with the household to maintain the appearance of prosperity. Such a girl, crossing the threshold of a luxurious mansion, instantly found herself trapped between two worlds that were never meant to intersect. She was no longer an equal to the host sitting in the living room, but she could not become one of the simple servants in the kitchen who despised her for her lordly airs. She was given a tiny, often unheated room under the roof, where water froze in the wash basin in winter. Instead of balls and receptions, she was faced with endless errands for her capricious mistress, mending laundry, and reading aloud until her voice was hoarse by the dim light of a candle. She was supposed to be grateful for the roof over her head and the piece of bread that were given to her as alms, constantly reminding her of her precarious position. This was not just employment, but a form of sophisticated social slavery, where the price for food was complete obedience and renunciation of one's own destiny. The family that sent their daughter to such a house often completely erased her from their daily lives, ashamed of their own powerlessness and failure. Letters from home were rare, and they more often contained requests for money or instructions to be humble than words of love and support. The girl understood that she had become a living reminder of her father's failure, and her absence from the family table brought relief to her relatives. Many of these poor relatives spent decades watching their hosts grow old and their heirs grow up, remaining forever strangers to this celebration of life. Their youth faded in stuffy rooms, their hands grew rough from work, and their hearts hardened from endless loneliness and unspoken resentment. They became keepers of other people's secrets, witnesses to other people's dramas, but their own drama remained unnoticed by anyone. The irony was that these very women who sacrificed everything for the sake of decency often became the bastion of morality in the home, strictly enforcing the very norms that had ruined their lives. They clung to these rules as if they were the last straw, proving their belonging to the high society that had rejected them. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about this choice? Giving up freedom and personal happiness for the sake of maintaining the appearance of family well-being? Write about it in the comments. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of the luxurious mansions of the past? The majestic facades of the Gilded Age houses, with their columns and stucco moldings, were just beautiful decorations, hiding a complex system of dividing people into classes. Architects of the time designed buildings so that the lives of the owners and those who served them existed in parallel realities, with virtually no overlap. It was not just a layout, but a social hierarchy set in stone, where each floor and each staircase had its own strict purpose. The main staircase, flooded with light, with carpeted runners and gilded railings, was intended exclusively for the owner's family and their guests. They walked up it in satin shoes, rustling expensive silks, ascending to spacious bedrooms and boudoir. For the poor relative living as a companion or housekeeper, this path was often closed, or she could only use it when accompanying the mistress. Her world began behind an inconspicuous door, often covered with green cloth, which muffled the sounds and smells coming from the service part of the house. Behind this door, the stucco and carpets disappeared. The walls were painted in practical dark colors, and instead of spaciousness, Narrow, winding corridors reigned. It smelled of wax, laundry, and food. Life here pulsated at a completely different rhythm, far from the measured idleness of the drawing rooms. The black staircase, steep and narrow, was the main artery of this hidden world, along which servants circulated like blood, carrying coal, water, and heavy trays. It was these steps that the girl from an impoverished family had to climb to her room after a long day, feeling her legs and back ache. These staircases had no windows, were lit by dim gas lamps, and were always cool and drafty. There were no fireplaces in these rooms, and the only source of heat was often a hot water bottle or a brick heated on the kitchen stove. They had to wash with ice-cold water from a jug, breaking the thin crust of ice in the morning, which was a real test for pampered skin. There was no place here for personal belongings, for memorable trinkets, for creating even a modicum of comfort. Only the harsh functionality of a place to sleep. Soundproofing in such houses worked only one way. The owners were not supposed to hear the noise of the servants, but the inhabitants of the upper floors heard everything. They could hear the sounds of music from the ballroom, the laughter of guests, the clinking of glasses, the sounds of a party to which they would never be invited. This echo of someone else's joy was painful. It rubbed salt in the wound and did not allow her to forget what she had lost. The system of corridors and passageways was designed so that the servants could appear and disappear unnoticed, as if by magic. The girl had to know which door to enter so as not to bump into guests, which niche to wait in if the master was walking down the corridor. This art of being invisible required constant tension and attention, turning movement around the house into a complex tactical maneuver. In this architecture of alienation, even the air seemed different. Downstairs it was saturated with perfume and cigars, upstairs with dampness and dust. The house, which was supposed to be a refuge, became a labyrinth of loneliness, where the walls did not protect but oppressed. How long do you think a person can remain sane while living in such isolation inside a house crowded with people? What I am about to show you is banned in 12 countries as psychological torture. But back then, it was the norm of everyday life. The process of turning a person into a function began with clothing. From the moment a girl had to change her dresses for a uniform or a strict black companion's dress. It was not just a change of clothes, it was a ritual of renouncing one's own individuality, one's right to express oneself through appearance. The fabric, color, and cut were now dictated not by her taste, but by the strict rules of the house and her status as a live-in. Instead of light muslin dresses in bright colors, she was supposed to wear thick wool or dark cotton, practical and stain-resistant. These fabrics were rough, they rubbed against her skin, restricted her movements, and always reminded her that her lot in life was now work, not decoration for the living room. Black, gray, dark brown. This was the palette of her new life, the colors of shadows, the colors of mourning for her own youth. A particular humiliation was the need to wear an apron if her duties were similar to those of a maid or housekeeper. This piece of white fabric was a mark, a symbol of service that could not be hidden or disguised. Putting it on was like putting on a yoke, acknowledging her subordinate position to those who had previously been her equals. Hairstyles were also strictly regulated. Hair had to be smoothly combed and tucked under a modest cap or a strict bonnet. No curls, no ribbons, no fashionable hairstyles. Everything had to be as simple and inconspicuous as possible. The mirror in her room was small and cloudy, but she didn't want to look at it anyway because a stranger was staring back at her. Even her scent had to be neutral. The smell of cleanliness and cheap soap, not perfume. The scents of rose, lavender, or jasmine were the privilege of the ladies sitting in the living room, and she was supposed to smell only of diligence. She was becoming a sterile, senseless figure, a sexless creature whose sole purpose was to serve as a backdrop for someone else's life. This daily masquerade, where the role was forcibly imposed, exhausted the soul more than the hardest physical labor. Losing her face, her name, her appearance. That was the price she paid for a piece of bread and a roof over her head. If you were moved by this chapter, please like it so we know you are interested in such deep historical details. Are you ready for the shocking truth behind the words domestic help? For a girl raised in luxury, whose hands were accustomed only to embroidery and piano keys, the collision with the reality of Victorian domestic life was a physical shock. The light duties promised at the time of hiring turned out to be exhausting labor that had nothing to do with romantic notions of service. The reality was rough, dirty, and required the stamina of a dock worker, not a delicate young lady. The hands her family was so proud of quickly turned into those of a laundress or a laborer. Red, chapped, covered with cracks and calluses, the icy water, harsh alkaline soap, and soda burned her skin until it bled. And no creams, if she had any, could save the situation. She hid these hands in the folds of her dress, ashamed of their appearance. But the pain from the cracks was a constant companion. Caring for the master's clothes was a separate ordeal. Heavy wet sheets, endless ironing with heavy cast iron irons that had to be heated on the stove. The heat from the stove burned my face. My back ached from standing on my feet all the time. And the slightest crease in the master's shirt could cause a scandal. Lace and delicate fabrics required meticulous care and had to be washed by hand, keeping my hands in water for hours. Cleaning huge rooms, beating carpets, polishing furniture and silverware required not only diligence but also considerable physical strength. Dust was an ever-present enemy with which an endless war was waged, and the slightest mistake noticed by the mistress was punished with a reprimand. The girl felt like a living mechanism for maintaining cleanliness, a machine that had no right to fail. A special kind of torture was caring for sick or elderly relatives if she was hired as a nurse. This meant sleepless nights, the heavy smell of medicine and illness, and the need to perform the most unpleasant hygiene procedures. This required endless patience and self-sacrifice, and the only gratitude she often received was the whims and complaints of the sick. Cold was a constant companion in the house. To save on coal, the owners often did not heat the corridors and servants' rooms. Constant drafts led to chronic colds, rheumatism, and joint inflammation, which tormented women until the end of their days. But it was impossible to get sick. Illness meant losing one's job and being thrown out onto the street. The body, unaccustomed to such a stress, quickly gave up. The blush disappeared, stooped posture appeared, and the eyes dimmed. Youth burned up in the furnace of the household as quickly as coal in the fireplace, leaving only fatigue and ashes. How do you think they coped with emotional isolation when their bodies refused to serve them? In a huge house filled with people, servants, guests, hosts, children, the poor relative was perhaps the loneliest creature of all. Her position was ambiguous. She was too noble to be friends with the maids, but too poor to be friends with the masters. She was suspended in a social vacuum, surrounded by an invisible wall that neither warmth nor sincerity could penetrate. Evenings when receptions were held in the house were especially painful for her. She could hear the sounds of music coming from the ballroom. Standing on the dark landing or opening the door of her little room, she caught snatches of melodies to which she herself had once danced. Her imagination painted pictures of the glittering hall, the ladies' dresses, the gallant cavaliers, and her heart ached with longing for the paradise she had lost. She saw her cousins and distant sisters arrive, dressed in silk and velvet, laughing and happy, full of hope. All she could do was watch them from afar, like a ghost watching the living, knowing that her lot was to hand them a forgotten fan or adjust a train. In their eyes, she saw pity or, worse, indifference, as if she were a piece of furniture that had suddenly come to life. Holidays such as Christmas only emphasized her alienation. While the family exchanged expensive gifts, she received some useful trifle, a piece of fabric for a new practical dress, warm stockings, or a prayer book, gifts that pointed to her need and dependence. She thanked them with a polite smile, feeling a lump in her throat from humiliation and resentment. She had no friends with whom she could share the hardships of the day, laugh or cry. She couldn't write home the truth. It would upset her parents, and complaining was not considered good manners. Her diary, if she kept one, became her only confidant, the only place where she could be herself. Sometimes looking out the window at the people passing by, she envied a simple flower girl or street vendor. They had freedom, their own lives, albeit poor ones, the right to laugh out loud and choose their own partners. She, on the other hand, had only a golden cage, the bars of which were made of debt and propriety. She allowed herself to cry only at night, burying her face in a hard pillow so that no one would hear her sobs. In the morning, she would get up, wash her face with cold water, and put on her mask of calm again, going out into a world where there was no place for her. Ready to learn the secret that broke thousands of hearts in that era? The most terrible sacrifice these girls made was not hard work or loss of comfort, but the renunciation of their own future. By entering into service as a companion or governess, they were effectively taking a vow of celibacy, although no one said it out loud. Their social status made them invisible to the men in their circle, and marriage to someone of lower status was unthinkable and meant a final break with their family. Years passed, and they saw their peers get married, become mothers, and become mistresses of their own homes. They remained eternal girls, even when gray hair appeared in their hair and deep wrinkles appeared on their faces. Time stood still for them in an endless today, where there were no prospects, no tomorrow filled with personal events. The status of an old maid at that time was not just an offensive nickname, it was a social sentence, a mark of inferiority. Society looked at unmarried women with pity and slight contempt, considering them failures who had not fulfilled their main purpose. They were denied the right to femininity and emotions and were attributed with a quarrelsome character and eccentricities. Motherhood, which many of them dreamed of, remained an unattainable, painful fantasy. They often transferred all their unspent love and care to other people's children, pupils or nephews. They nursed them, taught them, cared for them, and poured their hearts into them, knowing that one day these children would grow up and leave them, forgetting them like an old toy. Fear of the future became a constant companion. What would happen when they grew old and could no longer work? They had no husband to protect them, no children to bring them a glass of water. Their old age promised to be even more lonely and dependent, completely at the mercy, or lack thereof, of distant relatives. Sometimes there were tragedies of secret romances, with a teacher, with a manager, sometimes even with one of the guests. These stories almost always ended in disaster, expulsion, shame, falling to the very bottom of life. Fear of such an outcome forced them to kill any budding feelings in themselves. They looked at themselves in the mirror and noticed with horror how their eyes dimmed, how the corners of their lips drooped, how the girl they once were disappeared. Hope for a miracle faded with each passing year, replaced by dull resignation to fate and bitter regret. This was a generation of women whose family trees ended with them, dry branches on a blossoming family tree. Their lives were sacrificed to the idol of respectability, but was the sacrifice worth it? In the next chapter, you will learn how their relationships with those lower on the social ladder developed. The position of an impoverished noblewoman in the house of her wealthy relatives was complicated not only by the attitude of the owners, but also by a quiet war with the usual servants. For the butler, cook, and maids, such a lady was an incomprehensible and annoying element that disrupted the usual hierarchy of servants. She was not one of them. She did not belong to their class, did not share their culture, jokes, and interests, but at the same time ate their bread. The servants often felt the falseness of her position. She demanded respect as an equal to her employers, but did work that they considered theirs. This aroused jealousy and contempt. Look, the lady is darning her stockings herself. They saw her as a failure who had been unable to maintain her status and was now eating away at the real working class. The cook might deliberately set aside the worst pieces of meat for her or serve her cold tea, demonstrating her authority in the kitchen. Maids could accidentally forget to change the water in her jug or not bring a candle, citing their busy schedule. It was petty everyday sabotage, a way to show her that she was nobody here and had no say. She couldn't complain to her employers about the servants, as it would have seemed petty and unworthy of a lady, and her employers often valued a good cook more than their poor cousin. She had to endure ridicule, rudeness, and neglect, keeping up appearances and pretending that she was above it all. This required tremendous self-control and endurance. Male servants could be particularly cruel. Footmen and grooms, sensing her vulnerability, would make suggestive jokes or behave inappropriately. She had no protector who could put them in their place, and her own indignation only provoked laughter. She was an easy target for those who wanted to take out their anger on someone weaker but formally superior. She was a stranger everywhere, in the living room, where wealth and hypocrisy reigned, and in the kitchen where rudeness and simple manners ruled. Her place was on the stairs, in the hallway, in the border zone, where she was alone with her misfortune. This social isolation was exacerbated by the fact that she had no one to share her experiences with, no one to share her pain with. She was an outcast in both worlds, rejected by her own class and not accepted by the other. One of the most common roles for impoverished ladies was that of companion to a wealthy elderly relative or capricious heiress. From the outside, it looked quite respectable. Living in a nice house, traveling, engaging in small talk, simply being there. But in reality, it was the most sophisticated form of psychological slavery, where a woman had no personal time left. A companion was obliged to entertain her patroness from morning till night, reading novels aloud, sorting wool for knitting, listening to endless complaints about health. She had to be in a good mood at all times, always ready to keep up the conversation and anticipate her mistress's wishes before they were even voiced. No one cared about her own mood, headaches, or fatigue. She became her mistress's living shadow, her echo, her mirror, which should reflect only what the mistress wanted to see. She had to endure mood swings, outbursts of anger, senile grumbling, and always respond with a meek smile and agreement. Any objection could be interpreted as black ingratitude. When traveling, she served as a guide, translator, porter, nurse, and secretary all at once. While her mistress enjoyed the sights of Italy or France, the companion dealt with luggage, hotels, and tickets, unable to enjoy the trip herself. She saw the world from the window of a carriage or hotel room, tied to her mistress by an invisible chain. Friendship between the mistress and the companion almost never arose despite their apparent closeness. There was always a wall of money and power between them. The mistress knew that she was buying time and attention, and the companion knew that she was selling her freedom. There was no room for sincerity in this exchange. It was a life in a golden cage, where the bars were covered with flowers. But that did not make them any less solid. The woman gave her years, her energy, her life to brighten up another person's loneliness, while remaining deeply lonely herself. Being a companion meant slowly dissolving into someone else's life, losing one's contours, one's colors, one's voice. It was the profession of a chameleon who had forgotten its true color. The most terrifying nightmare that haunted these women day and night was the fear of losing their place and ending up on the street. In a world where there were no pensions, unemployment benefits, or social security, dismissal was tantamount to a death sentence. For a noble woman with no trade or physical strength, the fall would be swift and irreversible. Illness was a luxury they could not afford. If a companion or poor cousin fell seriously and long-term ill, she became a burden. Employers could tolerate a few days of illness, but long-term care required expenses and efforts that they were rarely prepared to make. The sick person could be sent to a hospital for the poor, from which there was no return to a decent home. Old age frightened them more than death. Where to go when their eyes could no longer see the lines in a book, and their legs could no longer run up the stairs? Some families, following their duty of honor, left their elderly dependents to live out their lives in a small room in the attic. But often after the death of their old patroness, the heirs unsentimentally put the extra mouth out the door, providing them with a meager severance allowance. The alternatives were terrible. A workhouse with its prison-like rules, a night shelter for the poor, or an attempt to find work as a seamstress where they paid pennies for hellish labor. For a woman raised with a sense of honor and dignity, this was worse than physical death. It was the collapse of her entire world. This fear made them docile, ready to endure any humiliation, just so they wouldn't lose the roof over their heads. They swallowed their resentment, smiled when they wanted to scream, and thanked people for their leftovers, because the alternative was starvation. Fear paralyzed their will, killed their sense of dignity, turning once proud girls into downtrodden creatures. Every day was a struggle for survival, to prove their usefulness and necessity. They tried to become indispensable, knowing all the habits of their masters, all the secrets of the house, hoping that this would be their insurance. Living under the sword of Damocles of poverty wore down their nervous systems, turning them into nervous, fearful old women who flinched at every loud noise. By the end of their lives, these women had become translucent shadows, whose existence was barely noticed by those around them. Their world had shrunk to the size of a single room and a chest containing all their earthly treasures. A couple of yellowed letters, a faded photograph of their parents, a dried flower from that one and only ball. It was an archive of unfulfilled hopes, a museum of a human life that never came to be. They grew old in other people's homes, babysitting the grandchildren of their first pupils, becoming living anachronisms, remnants of a bygone era. The new generation of owners treated them with irony or slight irritation, like old, unnecessary furniture that was a pity to throw away. Their old-fashioned manners, their clothes, their speech seemed ridiculous and absurd in a changing world. When they died, they left as quietly as they had lived, without disturbing anyone. Their funerals were modest, often at the expense of charity or the mercy of their hosts, in a distant corner of the cemetery. Flowers rarely appeared on their graves, for they had no children to remember and honor their memory. Their names were erased from the family's memory almost instantly. Oh yes, we once had a poor cousin Mary. I think she was quite good at knitting. That was the only epitaph they deserved for decades of self-denial and hard work. No one knew what they thought about during their sleepless nights, what they cried about, what they prayed for. But it was on the shoulders of these invisible women that the life and comfort of the great houses rested. They were the cement that held the bricks of family well-being together, sacrificing themselves so that others could shine. Their tragedy was quiet, devoid of pathos and dramatic gestures, but no less profound for that. Even after they disappeared, they left a mark on the atmosphere of these old houses, a ghost of sadness that can sometimes be felt in the empty corridors. We have lifted the veil on one of the saddest pages in the history of the beautiful era. The fates of girls given into service for the sake of propriety show us the underside of the glittering facade of the Gilded Age. It was a system that crushed human lives, turning living, feeling women into functional appendages to someone else's wealth. Their sacrifice was invisible but enormous, and their silence screams to us across the centuries about injustice and loneliness. What topics from the history of everyday life and women's destinies would you be interested in exploring in future episodes? Perhaps the stories of governesses or the fates of actresses of that time? Write your suggestions in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new journeys into the past.